I just got off a video call with my buddy Chris from MemeAnalysis, another YouTube channel analyzing memes, as you might expect. It's very smart, very perceptive, and useful, I think, to analyze the role that memes play in our evolving culture. We tried to keep it about ASMR. That was the original topic, of course, because it's relevant, but we couldn't help but taking wide swerves and veers and tangents into much deeper territory. But we always ended up trying to circle back around to the topic at hand. And, I think we both tried to just keep it casual, familiar, conversational, and attempt to look at the phenomena of ASMR through the lens of not just memes, but on a much deeper level. Chris, in particular, is very knowledgeable about psychoanalysis and its relationship to history and spirituality and science. I mean, he is very interdisciplinary, I guess, in that respect, and that's why I really enjoy him and his channel and what he's doing over there. And I wanted to have him on to kind of sort of interview, but an interview turned conversation. So I had a good time. I really enjoyed talking to him. I learned a lot. He was very accommodating to all of my questions I berated him with. So I hope you guys get something out of it too. It's not specifically ASMR itself, but we tried to, again, keep it very casual. And I thought it was fun. And hopefully I can start, doing more podcast-like content in the future on this channel if you guys enjoy it, and because I know I did. So let me know what you think. I'll let it roll from here. Enjoy. Get the audio. Check. Okay, start recording. Okay, cool. I think we're good then. Awesome. So yeah, I personally am just interested in what you got going on over at the MemeAnalysis channel. So yeah, if you want to just do a quick intro, you just give people an idea of what you're attempting to do with the channel, I guess.
So, with meme analysis, I found that it's extremely important to pay attention to the little things in our lives. And that's like one of the great observations from Jung, is that these little meaningless fantasies and dreams, even the tiniest, most ridiculous things, have a great deal of significance. And since I'd been reading that stuff, I found that the internet was a place where a lot of meaningful stuff was happening, and not a lot of people were paying attention to it. Or if they did, it was really just to make fun of it. They weren't really interested in why certain people posted certain things. And I'm very interested as to just generally, why do people post what they post? Why is it that, you know, we've all come together to laugh at these certain images, these memes, or certain videos are able to become popular for millions of people? Never in the history of mankind have we had such immediately popular images, and images that eventually, they fall right back down. They're only popular for a brief amount of time, and so they must be significant in that time and then lose it. So I'm very interested in why that is the case.
And have you thought about this, like doing this for a while? Have you was there a first major set of memes or something like that that maybe got you thinking this was a pretty important phenomena?
Back in back in 2014 is when I really started to think about those things, because I started to read philosophy and psychoanalysis, and I'd thought about it for a while, but it was only in, I'd say, 2016, during the election, when Pepe and Wojak became very front and center, that I realized, oh, these matter. They have a lot of significance. And so I put videos out back then, and I wrote about it back then, but I only really started doing it regularly in 2018. But I have been doing it for a while.
That So the distinction, that like made me think of a question of whether or not what's more important in your mind in regarding memes, like because I guess we'll eventually segue into ASMR specifically, but like people's intentional, intentionally making memes, or do you think it's more like it's more of an emergent phenomenon that's more important than the actual any one in particular, specific intention behind it?
I think it's definitively emergent. People that intentionally make memes tend to make very boring memes. If you're trying to make something popular, you fail. You have to have. I think, at least what I find is that it tends to be an unconscious phenomena. People will make a meme and they don't know why they've made it. Just like art, they get caught up in inspiration and they produce it. And that's why, at least in my analyses, I've found that many memes contain symbolism from ancient myths. And, these ancient symbols are surviving very well in the form of ridiculous internet jokes.
Ah, that's so fascinating. And yeah, that's actually kind of like a good segue because I do want to get into the deeper evolutionary, aspects. And again, ultimately, I think ASMR, I think we both kind of agree it's tied in pretty intimately to our evolutionary, tendencies, whatever instincts we might have. So, like, you said you were reading philosophy and psychoanalysis, and as far as like the archetypes, Jung's major idea, um, was there any like pre-internet things that you kind of see as just a continuity of, or the memes being a continuity of, like cartoons or something, or comics, or
I think that specifically we go with the ones that Nietzsche found in Dionysus and Apollo, and you see that like music has been the vector of an archetypal drive, and sculpture, and I find that like ancient Greek sculpture of gods and heroes has kind of become action figures and figurines. So a lot of products are archetypal in nature. Music, entertainment, and art tends to be the realm of the archetypes, um, because they have bright colors, they're dreamlike. And humor has always contained a lot of the personal unconscious, but only now, as our audiences, or anybody using the internet, has become immense and vast, that is why the humor has taken on an archetypal turn. In the past, you can make a joke that would make your friend group laugh, your family laugh, your town laugh, but now we have jokes that make the entire world, or at least the entire Western world, laugh.
ah, that makes so much sense. And like, do you think that lends credence to the valid, like I guess the validity, the truth of in regards to what it says about human nature, because it reaches if memes that affect so many people, like the sample size is like almost like the maximum, if you will, I guess.
I definitely think it lends, and to Jung's idea of the collective unconscious, that we do in fact share instinctual nature, and that humor is what reveals it. The fact that we can all laugh at the same thing does show that we have a definite bond, an unconscious relation that is, I would say, most definitely something that we evolved to have.
Oh man, that's yeah. I feel like we have to pay attention to things that endure, like that exist over the longest periods of time. That at least indicates. I guess that's kind of a pragmatic view. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but that's like um, we, all we can know is. Well, I guess you could probably explain it better than I could, but yeah, like things that exist for longest periods of time have to have the claim of being the realest or truest, I guess. Um,
It's something Philip K. Dick says that I find to be very truthful, and he was asked by a student at a lecture, "What is reality?" And he said, "Reality is whatever doesn't go away when you stop believing in it." And that's what I find that these repeating and relatively eternal archetypes show. They're things in culture that never go away.
Right, yeah, they just keep popping up, even from first principles or whatever, or like from even if there isn't like a continuity of generational stories or something like that. Um, yeah, like what would you say are the most like the most, not important, but I guess the deepest, the most universal archetypes?
I think that we can find them primarily in the tarot, with like the king and queen, the magician, which can all be emperor, empress, shaman. There's these many different names. There's, of course, the hero, which is made famous, the hero with 1,000 faces, which is what led to Star Wars, in Joseph Campbell. And Star Wars, I find, is like a really good proof, again. It's that a story so ancient can become, arguably the most popular franchise because it's the same exact story that appeals to your primitive nature, your archetypal nature.
Yeah, definitely. It's yeah, like so. I'm trying to find a way to segue like into ASMR, I guess specifically, because obviously we want to talk about it at some point. Like the idea of the shaman, I guess, is a good one because you actually said that, and I was reading the book I was telling you about the other day, the grooming gossip and evolution of language. I'm recording separately on my phone here too. But anyways, yeah, like how we have an instinct. It's modern humans have been shown to actually have about 100 to a very predetermined number, like between 100 and 150 acquaintances and close friends, and it doesn't seem to ever really fluctuate too much out of that range. And this guy's hypothesis was that that evolved from our small tribal groups and our nature of that ties in with that being the maximal number of people we can have one-on-one, grooming interactions before it evolved into gossiping, grooming, and gossiping language, um, and I guess that ties into ASMR being a very instinctual, like an instinct, a desire for us to have some sort of one-on-one connection in an intimate setting that's very in a secure environment. It gives you a sense of safety and part of in-group security. You kind of have someone being on alert and grooming you and looking out while you can, use that time to relax. And then maybe in the future you'd reciprocate. And but yeah, as we apparently evolved language, or at least maybe even music. I think I told you, I heard one guy say that he thinks, humming, maybe even whatever its most primitive form might have been, might have actually came before, language per se. I guess like actual definite words. And so as we evolved the ability to be able to communicate with sound and reach multiple people at once through sound, we kind of I guess we ratcheted up the cultural complexity of being able to communicate ideas much broader than just a one-to-one interaction. And so you were trying to say that you had an interesting idea about the ASMR tapping into the instinct for us all to listen to, a shaman or something like that, right?
I think that with the archetypal nature of those relationships, there's a part of archetypes that people tend to miss, which is something that Jung calls mythological pleasure. So that when you are feeling ASMR, it's such a deep instinctual pleasure, and I think that's likely why it has that sensual response. It's not just a kind of pleasure inside; it's something that comes out. You feel it, and it's the same thing that happens in certain archetypal relationships in general. But with ASMR, you get this very, very deeply instinctual relationship. And what you said about music coming before language, I completely agree. Like birds have music, and it makes me think about how dinosaurs had music. If they're evolutionarily related, dinosaurs had music as well, And this is to say that all of our ancestors have likely had grooming rituals. And, no matter how inhuman, physical contact is the most important aspect of a communal being. So when we feel ASMR, we feel a pleasure that every single ancestor through the aeons has felt. That is why these specific pleasures are just so, deep, so important and vital. And I think that that shows kind of the spooky nature of the internet, that we can get that kind of pleasure from a machine, from the internet. It's no longer that you need a parent or a shaman or somebody to talk to you. We now have the internet. We can gain this like almost spiritual, deeply meaningful pleasure out of something that you can, buy at a store.
Right. Yeah, and of course it can be is something that can be exploited too. It can be superficially recreated, and I loved your video on going into Five Below. I thought that was super interesting, and like you were saying that like the internet. Well, I won't put words in your mouth, but you were essentially I think pointing to the popularity of slime and very tactile, tangible things as being kind of like a counterbalance to the digital, what was it, less intimate experience nowadays.
People are delving into environments that literally lack any sensory nature. It's entirely a unconscious matrix. Just like somebody in the Matrix, like in the film, anybody in the pod has literally never felt anything. They might have thought that they felt it, experienced it as if it was felt, but their own bodies have not developed. And children are almost becoming this way, where they experience everything through the video games, phones, friendships online entirely. They're missing out on the all important nature of sensation and tactile play. And, this is why they're always talking about like, oh, millennials killed toy stores, but it is in fact true. Toys are going out of style because they are catering to a need which the internet has already taken care of. That's why slime is so important, because it's just sensory. There's no character or story. It's just a feeling. And there's,
Wow, it's so like bass, like it taps right into your bass. And I didn't even think about there's no anthropomorphism to it, like on most dolls and other things. No. I guess maybe there's gender if it's like one's pink and one's blue or something like that. But um, yeah, the Matrix analogy was really interesting too. It made me immediately, of course, they tried to evoke the image of being in a womb perpetually, I guess, because you literally are in like the amniotic fluid still, like until you.
and that's the root of matrix is mater. It's the matrix is defined by its fourness, and four is the feminine archetype as defined by Jung. So you're literally within the womb when you're in the matrix.
Ah, it's so interesting. And yeah, isn't that you just said mater? Like, isn't the root? Like, mother is like the root of the word matter in matrix, I guess, too.
And that shows us this bizarre inversion. Matrix used to be the world. The world was built upon matrices, and now it's the exact opposite. Now the fictional world is the matrix, and matter has been reduced to nothing. Matter is no longer important to people, or at least no longer important to people online.
That's okay. That really just brought up the idea of how, I guess, as recently as maybe 500 years ago, before science really kicked in to its, became an independent thing in history, how people used to, in the up until the late Middle Ages, used to really see soul in everything, even inanimate objects like rocks and things. Like is that your reading of history in general?
And I certainly return to that idea a lot, and specifically in Jung's book Synchronicity, he talks extensively about that idea, and that even like a fingernail or a rock or a plant has divinity in it because it's a microcosm of the macrocosm. We are reflections of the heavens and of this divine order, which is not even necessarily by God. It's just a superseded order. And so I think it is important that we see that the material is vitally important to understanding the mental. It's not just like, and that's the real problem with Descartes, that we have separated life from material. Jung and Reich are really trying to get back to this unity of being, which is super important. And that's even almost one of the main ideas in this book, the re-enchantment of the world, which I think is Morris Berman. And that seems to be one of his main points about how to reconcile the direction of science with religion. And it is a unity of body and mind.
Um, oh man, there's so many places I can go from here. So I was curious about the guy Robin Dunbar again, same guy. He has a pretty good TED talk. I said I was going to send you the link and I didn't. Sorry about that. But he did have a section of that TED talk where he tried to relay. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but he was trying to incorporate laughter and how it's very contagious, and that made me think of like all these other things that are very social things, very things that give us a sense of pleasure and a sense of community, and how he was saying they did controls where people would watch stand-up videos in a lab experimental setting. They would watch them stand-up comedians alone and then with a group, and it was 100% of the time the group would always invoke more laughter from each individual than just a person watching it by themselves. And I mean, yawning. I mean, there's of course millions of things I'm sure we could point out that are very contagious on a group level. But that's I don't really know where to tie it in. I guess the ASMR is what I'm trying to.
Yeah, it lends itself to ASMR in that so many of these integral human pleasures are experienced by communities and groups, and that my mission and yours are not so different, is seeing something ancient and doing something ancient with the internet. Like, you are catering to ancient pleasures, just like I'm trying to understand jokes. The laughter, which is contagious, is the same as this communal feeling, which is contagious. People throughout all of history, we will adopt others if we don't kill them. But we adopt others into communities, and that is through these rituals which make us comfortable with other people, laughing, yawning, sleeping together, and grooming. And and that's another aspect of ASMR. It shows just how unconsciously pleasant it is. Something that you notice talked about a lot and that everybody shares is that at night we tend to get a bit more sad, or that we tend to start thinking deeper. And so a lot of times, people regret at night. They look back on their lives and feel regrets. But the fact that people at night listen to ASMR shows like it's not something artificial, that it is something that is very deeply pleasureful. Otherwise, they wouldn't use it. That's kind of like a litmus test. Like, can I listen to this at night? If so, it's certainly something that I feel is meaningful. So the fact that it's already unconsciously accepted, I think, is very important. But I still think it lends itself to a sad image of modern life where we need artificial digital jokes, grooming, sexual relationships. It's all through this digital inhuman vector. And what we've talked about a few times is the idea of like bleeding the stone, lending itself to bleeding the screen, that when we try to get emotion out of something very cold and impossible, that is the dynamic of the individual trying to get pleasureful sensations out of the internet. They're trying to get emotions from something cold and inhuman.
And so, because technology is being integrated further and further into our lives, so of course it can't replicate. It can it can transmit ideas and communicate ideas much faster than we previously could, over a telephone call or what have you. But so I guess it's never going to give us the depth of communication as an intimate, physical interaction. But I mean, do you see it as? I guess you don't see it as all bad because your channel is based on internet memes. I mean, you think like we're in just a very chaotic period right now where we're kind of up in the air as far as which trajectory we can go, whether it's just all becomes trivial and vain, or we actually, use this technology for something, I don't know, like revolutionary for as far as how we um, view ourselves in a global community now is it is what you're trying to do, kind of like sort out exactly what memes actually mean for our culture and where our trajectory is.
As for how good things can get, I often return to a little talk that Jung gave, um, and he was lamenting giving it because it was being recorded, and he said, I am very anxious about my voice becoming separate from my body, that this recording of me will outlive my body forever. So, in a way, we are all, you and I especially, and people who make videos of themselves, we are giving ourselves up to an eternity in the digital. So, as to whether or not this is good for our world, I really think it depends on um, degrees and depth. How much, are we one toe in the pool or are we drowning? You know, I think it really depends on what the internet is used for. And a lot of people seem to think that the internet is becoming more and more capitalist, that it's becoming more and more of a product and not so much of a great forum where everybody can kind of share their ideas, but rather a few big ideas and everybody flocks to them. So I think that it really does depend on people's day-to-day lives. And if our day-to-day lives were more fulfilling or more meaningful, we might not have the danger of the internet. I think it is due to a crisis of meaning in the modern world that the internet has become a threat. I'm sure that there are certain times in history where the internet would be a very good tool and just a tool. It's solely due to this great crisis and turmoil that's in everybody that we find people who give themselves entirely to a fantasy. And more people doing this. So if a person lives a meaningful life, I don't think that the internet is a threat at all. So that's really what it comes down to. Are you swimming or are you drowning?
And it could, okay, so it could in that sense almost be just an amplification of what our existing human nature, just as we already are. It just holds a mirror up to us because it yeah, it records for however long these are going to last. This digital imprint or fingerprint of ourselves is going to last. Like, we can use it to come upon arrive at just a stasis, and or we can use it to as a mirror to be to judge our future selves against. I guess we can. Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know what to think about that. I guess it's just so new and so I think I told you before, the idea that this is another Gutenberg revolution is a fascinating one to me because I don't see it slowing down at all, and I definitely see, our nature just being amplified, basically. Like, it's just showing us so much more about our human nature than we ever realized before, we've ever had access to. So it's interesting in that sense, as a mirror of what we are.
And that's why my tagline on the channel is that memes matter. If we remain safe and deny things and say, no, memes are ridiculous and meaningless, we say that about human nature. We're getting such a clear picture. Oh no. But that if we just that if we say that memes are meaningless, we say that our own human nature is meaningless. We deny ourselves. This is why it's really dangerous when we attribute human behavior online to bots or to governments. It's almost a conspiratorial thinking to escape from tragedy. And that tragedy is the essence of humanity and of our conflicts. If we deny the worst part of people, we deny everything about people. And that's why we need to pay attention to everything on the internet. Not just memes and not just YouTube videos, but, pornography and these various communities for people that, other people might think of as very weird or very wrong and perverse. That is where we are getting such, a snapshot of humanity. We can't say no to that. We can't say no to ourselves. That's something Peterson talks about and Jung talks about. Like, if you can't see Hitler in yourself, you are denying your ability to be evil. And we can all be evil. We all have evil in us.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm fascinated by that point of, like, you know, well, I guess it ultimately comes back to Jung's idea of the self, and how you can't reach, if you conceptualize, our being, our psychic being as a tree, the branches can't reach heaven unless the roots have reached hell equally. I guess it's a balance of forces. Um, um, I'm not really sure where to take that from here.
I think that's a good point about imbalance, especially. Imbalance is what we need to understand. Like, ASMR used as a way to get to sleep and as a way to be comfortable is not necessarily imbalanced at all. But somebody who uses it as a way to avoid real relationships, that would be an imbalance. Or somebody who, and this is something I notice a lot, is that a lot of young people only talk in memes. They just text each other memes. They don't have any real conversations. That is imbalance. There, there's a moderation to it all.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'm trying to be. I think my instinct is to be optimistic. Maybe I just haven't read enough to be overly cynical about the world or anything. But it in that vein, I'd like to think that the access, again, it's what we do with the information. Where I read this book years ago by James Gleick called The Information. It's more science and technology focused, but it's essentially about how the value of things in the future is going to be measured by how it filters information for us, because it's not about the quantity of information. It's going to be more about the quality in the future. And I think people like you definitely, and I guess myself, what I'm trying to do is be a filter, act as you know, a filter to project what I think is, useful information for people to live, to ultimately be, I guess, fundamentally to be more good than bad as far as an influence on the culture.
Something that I found really interesting from a magician's page that I follow, he talks about the difference between a vertical relationship and a horizontal relationship. And the internet is almost entirely horizontal. Everybody's on equal footing all information is on equal footing. You know, complete fictions, lies are just as popular as truths and facts. And it's becoming more and more difficult to determine the difference between these things. That is why real human beings and, in a way, magicians who are taking all of these threads, all of these different things, and putting them together into something that you can understand, that is certainly the horizontal thing. You take all these things that are flat and clashing, and you bring it together into something that makes sense for people. And that's really, we need to make sense. We need to make meaning very badly out of something that is apparently meaningless. But we're getting into very out there territory. We should get back to that root of parental pleasure. As to why all this happened, it's all in the family. And the family is why we have ASMR. My girlfriend was telling me about how she remembers times in school being read stories at nap time and feeling ASMR, and feelings of being told stories at night. I know that was integral to my developing my love of reading and even love of speaking. A lot of it has to do with those night times. You know, these are such meaningful times in people's lives. And the fact that there's a huge internet community of people who, you know, love that feeling and are looking for that feeling is very impressive.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. I remember hearing one of your live streams. You said that you had close relationships with your grandparents as a kid, because I just could relate to that. It made me think of I used to like read books with my grandma, and I don't know if it was because she was older, so she couldn't move as fast, but she was always very slow but deliberate and methodical and graceful. And I think that's, you know, characteristic of again, I guess going into the uh, concept of an authority, our appeal to authority. You know, it appeals to our instinct for having an authority to be in the presence of something about someone who's very competent and knowledgeable, and you know you're evolutionarily they're in your in group. When you go to an ASMR channel, you know a series of things right up front. You know they're not going to be loud, not going to be abrasive. Ideally, there's minimal ads, so it's a very yeah, it's a surrogate for a secure setting, and that's tapping into our yeah, I guess our instinct for that familial um, belonging and that connection. So I'm definitely interested in the instinct for of ASMR as a surrogate for, yeah, just that personal interaction that we all seem.
You know, that was one of the first comments on my videos was that it was like a friend simulator, because my videos are very like open, and I'm very, you know, I'm not rambunctious like a lot of YouTubers. And I think that the internet is such a rambunctious, chaotic place in itself, that these little places where we can have a calm are just so rejuvenating. And that, you know, that is in a way much more authoritative and powerful, is being quiet and calm and clear, without all the show, without all of the spectacular stuff that's used in a lot of popular YouTubers' videos. You know, they're very loud, abrasive. The the thumbnails are really loud as well, and we need these calms. We can't be excited all the time. You know, that is kind of the Western ideal, is being excited all the time, never resting, never being calm. And I think that that has a lot to do with like why in our culture there's not a lot of authority left. There's not a lot of people who are solemn, calm, and deliberate. It's all excited, rambunctious, chaotic, loud, all the way up.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So in that brought me to, I think, our first discussion when I mentioned the again, I guess going to the balance of that is like the Joe Rogan Experience being a 3 hour plus podcast, and people used to think, and he says it all the time because it's a boon to his channel, that we used the market research when we had minimal television cable bandwidth, where it was you do things in a certain amount of minutes or you're going to lose the viewer. Nowadays it's because we're all on that level horizontal playing field. If people are interested in the quality of the content, they'll sit and listen for hours on end. Audiobooks is a big one, like you just referred to earlier. People are I have too many ideas going on at once. I was just thinking about the evolutionary tradition of us being very well adapted to listen to stories and narratives, much more so than the more recent invention of like reading. So I think it seems like ASMR and more realistic personas like yourself are just tapping into something that we have a deep desire for. Is just, I want to listen to this person because A, I enjoy their ideas, but B, we're always tacitly absorbing parts of their personality when we listen to someone, especially someone we look up to. It's because they're the way they carry themselves, or the way they react to certain ideas. So I know it's as much of a source of information, of ideas, as it is for just that instinctive social nature of ours to want to learn more about how other people carry themselves and mimic behaviors. A transmission of behavior, I guess, is another thing that's interesting.
And that's what's so fascinating about memes, is that it's very different from genetics. Memetics are mental genes, and whereas genes can take, millions of years to catch on, in, memes, and this is what really matters, and this is that importance of the horizontal, or my bad, the importance of the vertical, is that one vertical individual can spread memes throughout the entire horizontal. And it's really interesting you brought up that speaking is more ancient than writing. Though writing has dominated academia and politics for a long time, that's almost the modern turn, is a regression. And you see it in the Italian poet and kind of politician Gabriele D'Annunzio. He is the one who directly influenced Mussolini and Hitler to rely on speeches, not on writing. He is the first to make politics theater in a really important way. So in that sense, we are definitely making a big return to the voice as the fundamental thing. And we certainly know, as YouTube channels, the internet, when it first was created, was solely for written words. It was just message boards. As images and as voices became important, things changed drastically. And this is not to say that we're my bad, just not to say that we're fascists, but just that we also utilize the voice as the important thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, it can be exploited for nefarious purposes, but ultimately, it's just a tell of our true human nature. I was interested in Jordan Peterson's comment when he was saying he was watching Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins to discuss the meme that, Dawkins, was he the first one to, he coined that term?
And when he had coined it, it was criticized because it was too similar to Jung's idea of an archetype. And so I'm taking it back.
That's so interesting because it really is. It itself was a viral idea. It was the meme. The idea of meme was mimetic, extremely mimetic. So, yeah.
And I find that's such a testament to something unbelievable. The fact that an academic, a scientific term, is the term for this phenomena. Like the fact that everybody uses the word meme, even though it's something that Dawkins, a stuffy intellectual, thought of, that is very impressive.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Like I feel like he was yeah, I was just curious, like, yeah, like he was approaching it from such a. I read the book years ago, but I don't know. He never seems like someone that was very, stereotypically creative in an artistic way. He was creative in a very conscientious, scientific, rigorous way. But the fact that he came up with that idea, which, I'm sure, like all ideas, it had some origins. He grabbed from, whether consciously or unconsciously, from people prior to him. But I'm curious if he ever read Jung or even heard about archetypes, or something like that that gave him the idea for the.
Well, I think that's the benefit of science. I do think it was discovered. I don't think that memes were just thought up. I think that he saw the same nature in humanity that Jung saw and just gave it a different name.
Wow. Yeah, it's just the. So I guess if we want to get, or I'll take it real deep, real quick. I don't know how much longer you have. If you want to do another 10 minutes or another half hour, it doesn't matter. All right, cool, cool.
Completely up to you.
I just wanted to get your opinion real quick because we're going in that direction of archetypes in their source, and um, whether or not we know about a metaphysical being that created all of being. Um, the idea that that exists and how that's shaped our behavior over what is potentially, in religion's most prototypical, I guess is the word, forms for, maybe 500,000 years ago, for really stretching it back. What do you think about that, and what does that say about, like, the truth of that idea, if it's so mimetic, excuse me, and so viral, and it's so uh, it has such perseverance over time, the idea of God, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Well, I find that Jung has the best answer to this, and that it's almost identical with Wilhelm Reich and Nietzsche's answer, which is that, and this is directly from the Bible, that God is love, and that love is energy. Love is drive, and that Reich and Nietzsche show us that the same drives that influence just our slightest creative act, every time that we make love or have sex or do anything sexual, it is the same drive that created the world. That we see that there is a essentially dual, and in that duality, a singular energy. Nietzsche calls this a monster of energy and a ring, which is eternally self creating and eternally self destroying. That we perceive these flows of energy in our minds, our bodies, and in the world as God, and that we're not wrong. That there is that energy, which is what science is ultimately reduced to. It claims energy as the source of these things and as the drive behind things. This is identical to the psychologist, to the religious person. It's all hinting at this creative and destructive energy. So that to me is why everybody has some form or another of God.
So it's so whatever we want to call it, it is a universal impulse that is, like, one of our, if not the fundamental impulse, like will to power, I guess. Do you think it supersedes that, Nietzsche's will to power?
Well, that it's the will itself and power itself. That is that drive, that monster of energy. That is Wilhelm Reich's orgone, Freud's libido and thanatos, Jung's psychic energy and love. These are all the same thing. Fluidic currents of energy. This is what every magician after Levi is dealing with as well. What Schopenhauer is dealing with. Like, that to me is what's super important. And a brief tangent, Nick Land has this idea of accelerationism. and that the internet and technology are accelerating time and human nature to its brink. This is why all the techno-humanist stuff is happening, why people are trying to become machines. He sees the engine of this acceleration as death drive, as the destructive energy, and that we have a human history has a motor, and history itself has a motor in the form of that energy moving. So even just our conversations on the digital and on the internet are dealing with this as well. And I always fear that that mistake is made when people hear, oh, energy, God, love, that it's something that's very alien and intangible. But with Jung's idea of archetypes, like the archetypes that are repeating would not repeat without the energetic flow behind them. We would not be able to move, we would not be able to get out of bed without there being an energy to do so. Like when I talk about energy or God or the will to power, I'm not just talking about big supernatural events. I'm talking about the reason we're talking to each other, the reason that this computer was made, the reason that water's flowing through our pipes, and so on. It's what keeps the world going.
Yeah. Oh man, that holds really true in my experience. Just the ubiquity of love. And it's funny because I was just watching. I'm big into watching like movie reviews and criticisms online, which is interesting in itself, I guess. But someone was saying Interstellar. They're actually making a case for at the very end. If have you seen that movie, Interstellar?
Mhm.
Oh well, I don't want to spoil it for you. Then if you
No, it's all right. You can spoil it.
all right, spoiler alert. At the very end, um, the whole movie is set up to be this big scientific spectacle about how humans, we've they don't explain why, but for some reason the Earth's ability to um, yield plants, for our consumption is just a worldwide drought or something like that. So we have to look to the stars, and we go through this black hole that's mysteriously appeared in our solar system, and so they think it's a higher being directing us to a new planet to continue living. And at the very end of the movie, Matthew McConaughey goes into the black hole, and again it's set up to be this very scientific movie, and the pinnacle of the movie is him going into the black hole and realizing he slipped into the fifth dimension, and love is the universal, fundamentally, like the missing part in all the equations for how we're trying to synthesize the quantum mechanics with gravity. That's like our current big mystery in the field of science, is like how do we fuse the brilliant ideas of Einstein's general relativity, with which is on a macro scale, which directs the universe, with the quantum mechanical on the other end of the length spectrum, on this microscopic level, these equations that work impressively, every time to an extreme degree of accuracy. The one missing link was love. And that was the whole thesis of the movie, essentially. At the very end, they hit you with, it kind of builds you up, say, oh, science is our our only route to continue thriving as a species. At the very end, they say, no, it's actually at the core of it all. You can have all this technology you want, but it's love that is the fundamental impulse to keep living and communicate. So, anyways, it was.
I think that that speaks a lot to Jung and synchronicity. Like, so many people don't realize that nearly every major mathematician, physician, and scientist of the past and now ultimately is religious. They, in the end of their life, return to being religious. They might have a period of disbelief, but they end up seeing order in the universe. And Jung is giving us one of the most brilliant pictures of life when he's describing synchronicity. His work with Pauli is fundamental to quantum physics, the very idea that when we observe something, the thing changes. That is radical a very radical idea, and it came directly from his work with Jung. Like, we cannot reduce science to something that is not spiritual, not unconscious. It's not objective at all. We need to, take in our human nature to understand anything, and especially an unconscious one, which really indicates that telepathy and ghosts and these things, they all have a common root in the collective unconscious. You know,
Yeah, I think the impulse, again, like the internet as an emergent phenomenon, a collective snapshot of our culture, like you said, is a lot of like on Facebook. I know it was shown to have this bias towards aggressive, violent content because that was the most viral type of things. But at the same time, again, the the impulse to have content like yours and mine, thoughtful content with a just a more personal, honest portrayal of personalities is the antithesis to that. It's like people are like walking by candy bars in the checkout line. We have that impulse and we react to it a lot of times, but at the other end of it, if we actually take time to sit down, what we choose to actually focus on ends up being more thoughtful, more spiritual content, I guess, in a way. Content that evokes a sense of a good and wonder and awe in the universe. Like that's why I'm fascinated by your channel, because you pick up on the kind of these underlying just these intangible, non-rational, non-cold and calculated and dead ideas. Your work is very much focused on what's alive and what memes say about what is really at the core of the content we produce on the internet. So it's I think it's in a good indicator. In other words, I'm optimistic about what it means.
and I think that what we have to look at, especially with that candy bar and with that violent content, is Freud's idea of the compulsion to repeat. And a lot of people, their only stimulus is those things. They don't have the experience with greater or more intellectual or separate things, so they just go back to doing the same thing. I think that, like, the research is like 90% of internet traffic is pornography. So that's literally just a repetition of that same act. They're only interested in that. Like, so the key is really like growing past that repetition and getting healthier, new habits and new ways of living and thinking, because we will very happily remain stuck in patterns and in repetitions because it's unconsciously pleasurable, even though it ultimately hurts us. So that is what I think really good content can do. It can hook you in and draw you towards new ways of doing things. I'm sure that a lot of people don't look at the same content now that they did when they first started using the internet. They've certainly gone down new paths. So it's not as if everybody's going to be stuck at the very first stage forever. Everybody can grow past their initial thoughts and desires.
And that actually makes me think of what it makes me want to ask you what your thoughts are on the actual the age bias of people who use the internet in general, because I would guess that it's obviously younger. It skews much to the younger, and what that actually says about what characteristics we might glean from trying to interpret what's on the internet.
Well, it's always been said by, like, psychic researchers that young people have the greatest connection to the psychic realm, which is really the unconscious. So we get the most clear, undiluted picture of modern humanity in the internet due to that childish age, whereas older people, and you find that this is like a good thing, I think. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but like, I go on some like record player forums when I'm trying to fix stuff, or certain hobbies, they have a higher age group, and it's so much more, it's so different from other websites. Like, everybody speaks differently. Everybody uses even like emojis, like smiley faces or frowns, very differently. It's very, very, and this is why like it's funny to see old people that post memes, or old people that do this or that online. Um, it is, and I think that it has to do with I'm trying to find the right. Oh, like, Yoda, the Lego Yoda, where he is crazy, and he's an old character, but he's doing all this crazy stuff, like Yoda doing ketamine and that sort of thing. It shows, especially to young people, the image of old people, the image of boomers, is one that is very, very ridiculous. They don't understand the internet, at least not their part of the internet. They might understand forums, but they certainly don't understand the young people's internet.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely think there's like a bias in that respect. But it is interesting, like you said, I guess, would you say it's a more pure access into human consciousness? Just the younger you are, like as a rule of thumb, I guess, the less it would be like a nature versus nurture type of thing. The less access to cultural, conscious cultural content. Do you think the collective unconscious is more present in the youth in general?
I think that's the difficulty with the internet. We can't see that as well because the internet is so full of content that the child's mind is very quickly clouded and filled with stuff. Like, on one hand, you get a very clear look at, I think, mechanisms and drives, but not so much like the clarity behind them. It gets clouded, and that's why my work is necessary. Like, if a child was posting directly from their spirit, not through the clouded vision, like children's dreams and children's little jokes and games before there's television, that is important. That is what gives us the clear look.
Yeah, definitely. That's that makes a lot of sense. So I heard one analogy one time. It was probably Jordan Peterson. It was about like, I'm probably gonna get it slightly wrong, but the general idea is that our mind is of course many different impulses and drives. It's not just one uniform thing all the time, but a lot of competing personalities inside us, which is a fascinating idea in and of itself. But it helped me visualize my inability to stick to a rigid discipline, or whatever it might be, eating, working out, as looking at our mind as like a cargo ship with a tiny little rudder in the back. And if you don't, again, like the Titanic, you're going to hit the iceberg if you don't course correct in enough in advance. And so of course the older we get, maybe the more cargo we put on, so the harder it is to make that turn. um, but it just, I guess, the general idea of our minds not, our consciousness, I guess, was to complete the analogy, our consciousness was the rudder, and everything else in our mind that we're kind of unconscious of or dimly aware of is that huge ship that we're trying to control with this tiny rudder.
It's very amusing because I find that that is, or I guess if we say that the ocean is the unconscious as well, or the ocean is drive, and the motor is drive, I'd agree. But that's just a little point. But I think it's also really important that we look at Jung's idea, and people often don't know that Jung came up with this, but the midlife crisis. The midlife crisis is when that ship has a mutiny midway on its journey and just gets rid of tons of the cargo. We're like, this is no longer coming along with us. We're getting rid of this, and we're going to keep going. there are these critical points where we realize, like, oh, that was not supposed to happen. This is not who I am. And we, get rid of that, hopefully, and stick to something more honest and truthful. The problem is that we have, like, automotive companies and motorcycle companies catering to this. They are selling you an image, like, oh, your relationships, your spirituality is at stake, you're suffering, buy a boat, buy a car, buy a motorcycle, as if that would change anything. And this is not to say that going out on a boat ride or going on a cross country trip is not going to give you experience and give you wisdom, just that that's not a cure to meaninglessness.
Right. Yeah. And it's okay tying, I guess, dovetailing into your idea of Dostoevsky's Underground Man, and essentially this was a guy who was just seething with Nietzsche's ressentiment, right? And he just never. I guess he was, in a way, maybe having a midlife crisis, or because he was just too much of a coward to actually act on the impulses he knew to be right.
I think what I find a lot in these Russian characters is that they were never truly confident in what they were doing. There was always a great dis-ease. There was always a great suffering that led, and it's just compiling and compounding, where doing the wrong thing again and again and again, or eventually just choosing to do something, that is really the source of the story. Like, the Underground Man always fantasizes about getting beaten up. He wants to just go to a bar and get beaten, just to feel anything. And this kind of reminds me of Blade Runner, where, and here's a spoiler itself, Roy Batty, as he's dying, he's coming very near he's a machine, he's a replicant, he's going to shut down, but in his last few moments of life, he chooses to take a nail and shove it through his hand so that he can have an intense feeling. So I think that has a lot to do with why we do bad things or strange, radical things when we feel meaningless, when we feel meaninglessness.
Right. Yeah. And man, that's like it seems indicative of like something we can avoid as some sort of dystopia if we, obviously the more we integrate digital, whatever technology into our lives, the more tempted we will be to not do exactly just that. Live very sheltered virtual lives, and not actually activate the potential that we actually have, so that's a very interesting concept to me, is that to truly get the deepest sense of meaning in life, we have to, like you suggested before, go out and be in contact with reality, because we are not just our brains, but we are actually our senses, and our touching, feeling, taste, smell, like those all matter just as much as visual and audio, I guess.
And that's Nietzsche's idea of the last man, is somebody who only wants to be comfortable. They're only interested in comfort. They do drugs for comfort, like a bit of poison now and then for pleasant dreams, and lots of poison for a pleasant death. They love warmth. They're afraid of going out into nature to be cold. They huddle up against each other. They need each other. There is no there, and this is what he fears the most: that there will come a time when there is no energy in people left. He sees the energy in people often as a bow that's being strung, and that one day that bow will never be strung again. We will never loose another arrow. We will never dream a dream. That one day it will just be stationary and comfortable. We'll never go farther again. And that's his huge fear.
So I was actually, maybe like a year ago now, I was taking requests like a year and a half ago, and the very last one that I haven't gotten to yet, but was on the concept of utopia versus dystopia. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized I was ignorant about what would that even mean, because I had this very juvenile concept of just like, um, I don't know, just like a very mechanical oppression. Not I didn't really factor in the psychological effects of being oversaturated with pleasure, or at least very shallow pleasures. So in that sense, and that seems like ultimately that's the true dystopia, is being oversaturated and by our own shallow impulses, and not ever achieving anything meaningful and enduring with our lives.
That's why I love Huxley's Brave New World, and the severe dangers of meaningless pleasure and meaninglessness in general. Um, and almost it's very darkly funny, but that I forget the characters and I haven't read it in a while, but the character who is raised on a kind of reservation for native people to live like normal people, he's brought into the world and can't bear it in the end. Um, and then we have an image of a dystopia in the Odyssey with the lotophages who eat lotuses to feel pleasure and do nothing. And now that's a severe danger. And we near that more and more as physical, meaningless pleasures become the center of it all. Like, and this is my own little conservative fear. Like, if marijuana becomes entirely legalized and popular, think about how much creativity will be sapped. And like I said, moderation allows that to be a good thing. You know, any drug can be positive. It's just, and as Paracelsus says, the poison is in the dose. So that is my worry: is anything that leads to meaninglessness, any preoccupation with entertainment above substance and matter.
Definitely, yeah. I actually recently was in Seattle, where it's legalized, and my friend's brother was saying that he noticed a lot of the younger kids don't even look at weed as a anything to really try to partake in, because it's legal. It lost the luster, the appeal of a rebellious teenager's instincts. So that it that's an interesting debate, is whether or not making everything legal. I guess the the where do we draw the line in the sand as far as what we can and cannot do, which makes me think of, I got I got was it Terrence McKenna's book about mushrooms, Food of the Gods. I heard you reference McKenna before. Yeah, I'm curious. That makes me think, what are your thoughts on um, the I guess the any sort of benefits in as far as insight into our psychic nature through hallucinogens, if any.
So, a lot of the people, like Aleister Crowley, who's the guy that I primarily use for magic and occultism, he used drugs heavily to gain insight. Huxley, he died using LSD. Like, he was dying and he chose to have an LSD drip to have, a heightened spiritual experience. Um, and Young talks about drugs, actually. He talks about mescaline. And I completely agree with his picture of it, which is that it gives us a radical, clear insight into our unconscious minds. The question is just if you are ready. I would say the vast majority of people are not ready, and this is why we have the image of the stoner or the burnout. They witnessed the truth and it destroyed a part of them. It prevented them from growing. So I think that, like, I don't think that drugs are bad. I think that, especially if there was a shamanistic individual who would help the person, like if it was in a shamanistic or physician sense, it could be good, but it certainly should not be for entertainment and recreation. It's something that's just as horrific and terrifying as a nightmare or a dream, which gives us insight into the unconscious. It should not just be for pleasure, I think.
Right, definitely. Yeah, I feel like there's a a skewed perception of drugs, as party and festival drugs and all that. And I think that's the exact antithesis of what, that's just the opposite of what I think they could potentially have the potential to, be used in like a very hospitable clinical setting. I think would be awesome. And I've heard about some institutes doing MDMA in a very, clinical setting that's probably conducive to, just self transformation, positive in a positive way. I was because I just wrote two things down about I'm trying to keep this on about ASMR, but I guess my channel in general isn't a typical ASMR channel. That's why I called it Let's Find Out, because I believe in the ASMR concept in general, like even beyond specific like triggers and tingles. I just liked the idea of content that was suited for just being more conducive to a relaxing, engaging experience rather than just a trivial, superficial, loud, just a fake image of just more focused on the information and less about the spectacle. And so I was curious about the idea, like you said, of a mentorship. And I think that's another piece of it tying in. Again, like when we engage, the reason I like Joe Rogan and a lot of the guests he has on is because they seem like they're very willing to confront new ideas in an honest manner, to the extent they're not always perfect, and we all got our biases and all that, but the idea of a mentor as one who shows you how to confront new ideas and what to do in the place of the Jungian idea, the Petersonian idea, Jordan Peterson's idea of chaos and order, and how the yin yang symbol is symbolic of the correct way to live in life, walking that line, having one foot in chaos, one foot in order. And my final point, I guess, is just it's interesting that the concept I'm fascinated by is the concept of taking on problems your size, like being what we're interested in are issues that our mind perceives as being possible to actually confront. So I don't worry about global takeovers and conspiracy theories because I just personally I can't do anything about them, and so it would be a waste of my energy at this point. Even though it's fascinating, as a younger guy, I went down those rabbit holes, but it's very engaging and meaningful. It seems as I get a little older to recognize that confronting issues my size and then ratcheting up every time, you just trying to get better and better and tackle progressively larger problems so that I don't get overwhelmed by trying to address too big of an issue for me. And what that says, about like your MemeAnalysis channel is it's just very perceptive, very interesting, and you address very specific memes, and I kind of like that because you do tie it into much broader concepts, but the not only the content but you as a person addressing these memes shows a lot of people how they can approach memes and new ideas and apply it to their everyday life. So you as a mentor is a fascinating concept. I think that's why I'm engaged in your content.
I think that something that Freud talks about really shows what is good about this is like he was going to go to America to deliver a lecture, and it was very important because he had to make psychoanalysis popular in America. And so he says, I'm going to deliver this wonderful lecture on psychoanalysis to the most important psychologist in America, and I'm going to see a porcupine. he had a way to not overthink and over worry. Like, anytime we take on something, we can't go too big. We can't take on something that is beyond us. We have to grow to get there. And that can be done by acknowledging the small things along the way and having, these sources. Like, that to me, and what you're describing with this willingness to take on new ideas and think and take a balanced approach, to me, the opposite of that is Twitter. And I am reminded of the Odyssey, where the souls of the dead are described as twittering. So it's like, all these endless voices and ghosts speaking and speaking and trying to be heard. And none of it, is physical. None of it makes contact. Other than when one chooses to listen, as Odysseus goes down. But that is super important to me. The fact that there are solid voices. There are real voices, but one just has to find them. We should not get caught up in this endless array of voices. It's something that is talked about in a Genesis album on The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which is like an album about Young, essentially. And there's a song called The Chamber of 32 Doors. And all these people are like, oh, get in my door, come this way, this is the truth. And there's only one right way out.
Interesting. And so that makes me think when you said Twitter, people trying to solve the world's, or claiming to, have all the solution to the world's problems in 160 characters. The opposite of that, I'm curious on your take on like just the Western canon, like I've asked you before in your last live stream. Because for me, I went to college for engineering, and so I didn't expose myself to a lot of great works of literature and history, and I'm kind of doing that, retrospectively or retroactively, I guess now, because I want to see the great ideas and thinkers and philosophers that informed civilization, Western civilization now. So, do you think? I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm sure you agree that it has a lot of value, but as far as what, how that conflicts with the internet and the age of very impulsory content. And maybe I guess to put it in a question, what do you see as the solution to that? I mean, just how do we gain as much value from it in the age of 10-minute YouTube videos?
I think it is getting yourself familiar with meaning and meaningful things. This is why I think like myths are so great and so important, because you read them as stories, or fairy tales. You read them as stories, but they contain all of the great wisdom of the past. And so if you have a child who is raised with mythology and has like a very solid understanding of it, they are already set to understand things. They just need to kind of unlock it and read about what it really meant. There's the secondary level, but if we raised everybody with mythology, even with like Christian stories, if everybody had read the Bible, the Quran, Talmud, and Greek and Roman myth, Norse myth, and so on, if you had all these stories circling around children's heads, it'd be very easy, because they would see patterns. They would see the dynamics of humanity in these myths. So to me, there is infinite meaning in ancient literature, but especially in mythology. I like Shakespeare a lot, but I can understand the language barrier for a lot of younger people. But I do think that it would be a boon to raise people with more theater, more entertainment that is meaningful. Like, this is something my girlfriend talks about a lot. Like, we give the worst things in life to kids. Like, the worst food, like chicken nuggets and Kraft mac and cheese. That is what we give to kids. The worst, most, insulting, stupid television. It's for kids. You know, kids are raised with low quality stuff now, and I think that that is a really big hypocrisy. Like, oh, we want our kids to learn well and to be smart and to do great things. Then why are you giving them a foundation of garbage? And it's a foundation that lasts. Like, you see kids are still preoccupied with the entertainment that they had as children. People are still stuck with that because it was made to be effective. It was made to addict. So I think that's a big problem. Like, I didn't have computers or video games when I was younger. I mean, I had toys and television and stuff, but not nearly as much as some others. I was raised with a lot of stories, and I think that that lent itself to my later development.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I guess that's a fascinating part is like the to develop as early as possible the capacity for critical thinking and a long attention span. I guess is crucial to that, and so that's definitely one of our struggles going forward in the age of just instant access to everything. That's going to be an issue. But again, like yeah, audiobooks and these not 9-10 hour YouTube lecture series are very very popular. So it makes me optimistic that um, if we have enough people promoting just the best ideas of the past, it will reach more ears than ever before. And so, hopefully that's where it goes.
I think that the attention span thing with children is a red herring. I mean, you ever talk to a kid? They could talk for hours about something they care about. They don't have short attention spans. They're just bored with meaningless garbage. We need to give children good food, good mental food. They would love it. They would talk endlessly about it. Um, so I think that that's what it comes down to. It's not a short attention span. It's not a child problem. The school system and the public education system and education generally tends to fail children. Parents tend to fail children. Um, there isn't there's a healthy way of raising children physically and mentally, and I don't think it's even that difficult. It's really bizarre that we've gotten to this point, which is the whole conspiratorial element. Like, is it not intentional to get dumb consumers?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's probably just some exploited aspect of a capitalist economy, but probably not a conscious, worldwide conspiracy. That makes me think of one of the ideas I'm interested in as far as what this new technology, the internet in particular, means for our future is Peterson's idea of responsibility being very proportional, directly proportional to the amount of meaning and purpose we feel in our lives. And so, the I'm curious about your take. Like, what's your take on the fact that we're inundated with so much information about the world? As before we might have lived in a small town, an insular town, we didn't really know much about the crime rates in the world or the poverty existing elsewhere, so we didn't have that kind of guilt. And I'm curious if, like, we need to, alluding to what you said, give children more credit and the human mind more credit in general, and saying, listen, we're actually a lot more capable of dealing. My dog's having a dream right now. Interestingly enough, um,
Oh,
we need to, yeah, essentially, like, allow children, or as young as possible, the opportunity to take on as much responsibility as we think they can. Now that we have access to so much information and education.
I think to a large extent, people realize that a lot of what is going on in the world is meaningless psychically. It is not real. What is real is what we have. Like I mentioned very early on, what Philip K. Dick said, that reality is whatever doesn't go away when you stop believing in it. And we have to be honest about object permanence. Like, there's not a lot that is real psychically, other than what's in our day to day lives. Like, that is what we have to kind of get to. And I don't mean to be apolitical, because I'm not into politics at all, but just that, does it really affect my life? If not, what does it mean? We cannot survive based, a lot of artists say, oh, I can't survive on just exposure alone. Politics is just exposure. There's nothing material to it for the majority of people. Or maybe not. Maybe that's not fair. But generally, a lot of ideas which have no substance take up people's minds, especially people that are depressed, or especially people who have a great deal of anxiety. They will make these social problems the source of their anxiety, even though it's personal. And people criticize Peterson a lot for that idea. I find that that is one of his most true, though. That we have to deal with our own room. We have to deal with our own life before we move out into the world. It's just, that I think is true.
Yeah, so true, so true. And I really think it just makes a lot more sense to be able to. It seems to me like it it says a lot about our um, a possible positive aspect of what ASMR means for reconnecting and having that feeling of connection on a again a personal level, and how before we can fix an entire nation, maybe think about fixing your room, and if you're able to do that, maybe we can like help your local community out. And I think a big project that speaks to like the importance of a big project being finding communities again in the age of the access to people across the world. Me and you are 1,000 miles apart, and this is amazing. But at the same time, my physical community, me feeling like I have my feet on the ground, so to speak, outside is going to bring a lot of meaning. To build up our local neighborhoods and then maybe communities is I think is going to be a very meaningful goal, a direction to orient ourselves towards in the age of like you can hop online and just zone out because there's so much static, so much information coming at you. You don't know where to begin. Well, yeah, that's where I think it's to have skin in the game in your local area is probably really meaningful. Most meaningful.
Absolutely. And I do that a lot. I'm very involved in the local arts community, and I put on concerts and make films and try to be involved as much as I can.
That's really cool, man. That's awesome. Well, yeah, I'm definitely. I just recently purchased a house, so I'm definitely rooted, becoming more and more rooted in my community here, and hopefully I'll be starting a family soon in next year or so. So that's definitely my.
Great.
Yeah, I think. Thank you. I appreciate that, and it's um, yeah, it seems like that's where I'm going to find the most meaning. Not to just keep myself in a bubble and just only worry about my family, but to slowly again face issues that are our size. Not to try to take on and solve the world's problems. Try to solve my own problems, and then maybe I can help my family, and then maybe I can fortify them to help the community and just make the world a little bit better than how we entered it. So that's kind of where I see
Absolutely.
it. Yeah, that's really what I think ASMR is kind of just tapping into, is like people just need a sense of they just need an anchor, and to again go to the I think in the Red Book, Young, or maybe it was Ion, but those are the only two books I've read of his. But he makes an analogy of like needing an anchor, like a harbor to find refuge in, and when the collective unconscious, the sea, and our own unconscious even becomes a storm hits, because occasionally storms will hit, and you have to be anchored so that you don't get ripped out to sea and lost.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think It does. It comes down to that fundamental comfort, security.
Yeah. So, well, man, this is great. It's been like over an hour and a half now. I don't want to take up too
Yes. No, I think it's
much, but I think this has been awesome. This has been really fun for me, and I'm curious to see what kind of engagement and uh, you know criticism or comments we get on the video. So,
definitely. Thank you for having me on.
yeah, man, this is great. I mean, and of course, you can put it on your channel too, so it works. It works both ways. But it for people watching it from my channel, if there's anything you wanna, any links or areas as far as your online presence, you wanna direct them to.
Probably just I'll send them over, but my channel, just the YouTube channel and art that my girlfriend and I do. We have comics out and that sort of thing. But that's pretty much it.
Cause you said that YouTube published a comic book, right?
Yep.
What's
Yeah, we
dude?
did.
By it, man. What's can you explain what like that might be about or something, or your impulse to do it?
We follow. Yes. It's actually based on a sculpture that I made. I made a sculpture of Saturn, the god, and um, especially in conspiracy theories today, he's depicted as a black cube, and this is in fact an ancient aspect of his symbol. Jung talks about it in Ion, and I'd been thinking a lot about my own creative process and about the problems with comic books being very formulaic and boring. So I thought, what better way to put it than just a head, which is the ego, in a box, a panel in a comic book. There's only boxes. And it's just kind of this look at, it's certainly not a super happy one. Kristen, her comic, my girlfriend's comic, is a much more driven, I would say. Hers is called The Owls, but the one that we did together is much more drifting and much more, I would say, like experiential. It's my work at trying to make a new kind of comic, something very different from superheroes, and that is called Black Sun.
Black Sun, very cool. And did I hear you say, I don't know which one it was, but because you were in Jersey, the home of Kevin Smith, Silent Bob himself. You guys are at his. You have your comics in his store.
Yes, we do, and I actually was in a movie with Kevin. I portrayed a young Kevin Smith in a movie about the making of Clerks. Yeah, crazy enough. Yeah. No, it's out. It's out. It's called Shooting Clerks. It's on.
Oh man, I gotta look at that now. I gotta look that up. That is awesome. Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool, man. Well, man, this has been an absolute pleasure for me. It's fun talking to you because you have,
Yeah.
I don't know, you just I'm glad that you're. I guess we're just fascinated in a lot of the same topics, and this is cool that we're just two random people with a phone and an internet connection, and we can make this happen. So, um,
Absolutely.
I wish you nothing but the best, in your life and your channel, and maybe we can do this again soon.
Absolutely. All right. It's been good to talk to you.
All right, you as well. All right, you take care. Bye.
All right. So long.